All right. The third Saturday of January has become a staple in Crucian calendar. The annual meeting is the preeminent event of the Society of Virgin Islands Historians, in which we present to the community free of charge a series of papers on a timely subject. This year is special as we are partnering with the St. Croix Friends of Denmark. We thank them for their support. This year, we have been unexpectedly hurled into technology. The task of setting up a virtual program has its own challenges, and we have all risen to the challenge. As I say every year, the annual meeting is free of charge to participants. This is our New Year's gift to the community. We thank you for your support in the past. Because of you, our annual meetings have been all well attended. We would like the board members of the Society of Virgin Islands History to please raise your hand. Officers are Susan Beech, and we are looking for a treasurer. Will all other members please raise your hands? All right, Stan Joins, Julie Frederickson, Carl Christensen, Aletha, is it Aletha? Yeah. Okay. Oh, Brian O'Reilly. Hi, Brian. Yes. Nina York. Okay. Maurice James. Okay. We are always looking for new members. If you've already been a member before, renewals are not necessary. Simply send in your dues of $40. If you wish to become a new member, just download the application form on vihistorians.net and mail the form to the Society of the Virgin Islands Historians. You don't have to have a degree in social science, but an interest in VI and Caribbean and/or American history, heritage, and culture. Once the form is completed, get 2 members of the society to vouch for you and send your form to the post office box. You will receive word when your application has been approved by the board. After you have been admitted, you can mail in your $40 dues. We cannot stress enough how we are most thankful to our members and supporters. We look forward to the possibilities that 2021 will bring. And now we will start, and we will have Francine Lang, who is the president of the St. Croix Friends of Denmark.
Good day to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Francine Lang, and I'm the president of the St. Croix Friends of Denmark Society. I bring you greetings from our members and welcome you to this auspicious event. We are pleased to be collaborating with the Society of VI Historians to present this symposium highlighting the significant contributions that Mr. Casper Holstein made to St. Croix over his life. This event provides an excellent opportunity for the St. Croix Friends of Denmark to continue our efforts to educate our community about our history. It also takes on an even more important significance because our normal activities have been curtailed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are grateful to have other opportunities like this one to engage our membership and potentially attract prospective new members. Enjoy today's presentation.
And now we will have Julie Frederickson, Vice President of the St. Croix Friends of Denmark, and one of the initiators of this entire project.
Julie, you're on mute. You're muted. Okay.
I got it. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay. Good morning. On behalf of the St. Croix Friends of Denmark Society, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's presentation of Casper Holstein, a man of influence and philanthropy in the Virgin Islands. This program is the result of a joint effort on the part of the Society of VI Historians and the St. Croix Friends of Denmark. At this time, when our usual forms of social interaction are unavailable to us, we are pleased to be able to bring this presentation on the life of Casper Holstein to our internet audience. In his book, From These Shores, St. Thomas author Axel Hansen quotes the following: "If one accepts the premise of Robert South, British theologian, that if there be any truer measure of a man than by what he does, it must be by what he gives, then Casper Alexander Holstein was a giant, for he gave generously to more causes than can be recorded on a single page." Our goal is to illuminate the life of an important individual in the history of our Virgin Islands community, as well as within the larger African American community where he spent his adult life. Thank you. For more information about the St. Croix Friends of Denmark, please email us at stcroixfriendsofdenmark@gmail.com. That's STCROIX, Friends of Denmark, all as one word, @gmail. Or go to our website, friendsofdenmarkstx.org. Thank you very much.
And now we will hear from Sanchez, our IT coordinator.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Just a few notes. We will be starting the presentations, which are video recordings of our speakers. They are here and they'll be available to answer questions. For smoothness and to ensure that the video is relayed as smoothly as possible, we ask that you turn off your camera, use the buttons to shut off your camera and your mic, and that will ensure the smoothest reception. Also, during the presentation, you can use the chat to type in your questions. Ms. Susan Beech will be monitoring the chat and she'll be making notes. So if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat. And during the question and answer session, we will try to answer those questions. And like I said, this is being recorded, so just be mindful of that as well. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Susan Beech, our secretary and one of the technical technicians who have set this whole thing up for us today.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 32nd Society of the Virgin Islands Historians Annual Meeting. As a third-year member of the Society, I have been Executive Secretary for 2 of those years, and I'm a past presenter on Castle Coakley at the 2018 Annual Meeting. I taught science and served as a librarian for the Virgin Islands Department of Education and retired from that department after 35 years. As many of you know, SVIH conducts an annual meeting each third Saturday of January. Scholarly presenters share their research and findings, and the public is always invited. Because of the constraints of the pandemic, our first thought was to skip this year, which would have been the first year missed since Hurricane Hugo. However, our president had other ideas, Ms. Rizzinde, Dr. Rizzinde. She had a vision that we would go virtual, albeit it was a fuzzy vision, but Because of her dogged perseverance and the many who collaborated, this vision came into focus. There was encouragement from all quarters. The St. Croix Friends of Denmark signed on as a co-sponsor. Amy Sanchez of UVI was highly recommended as our IT coordinator. UVI has been instrumental, and the society membership pulled together to make history for our organization, and you, the audience, are making this history with us. In fact, we learned so much and utilized platforms, for example, purchasing advertising from Facebook. And if you are here as a result of hearing about us through Facebook, could you please in the chat simply write FB so we can get an idea of how effective that was. Now that we have made one giant leap online, we're casting a much wider net and endeavor to pique the interest of the younger generations. Otherwise, who will carry on this tradition of promoting Virgin Islands history? We implore members of the education community to visit our website and become members in the future. This brings us to our first presenter, who is just that scholarly member of the faculty of the History Department of the St. Croix Educational Complex. He has a following of thousands of students, my daughter included, who was very fortunate to be in his class. And in case they are all sleeping this morning, Mr. Hewitt can assign them to watch the entire program on demand on YouTube at their leisure. Awesome. So I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Ronald Hewitt, is a native Virgin Islander who graduated from St. Croix Central High. He studied history at Morgan State and Cornell universities. He serves as a social science teacher, instructing students in American history and at the educational complex. He presented an overview of Casper Holstein's life at the 2019 annual meeting. And using that paper, he has agreed to expand his work and present at this multi-paper series on this important Virgin Islander. I'm very pleased to present Ronald Hewitt. Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Hewitt has pre-recorded his lecture, and I will play that for you now.
Casper Holstein is an interesting guy. The last couple of years, I've been looking at a lot of material on Casper Holstein, and I came to the conclusion that he's a true Virgin Island hero. You know, he came to this game of politics pretty late in life. He came to this fight to help Virgin Islanders when he was already probably 40 or more. And most people who actually become leaders in these big adventures usually start pretty young. You know, the other day I was talking to my students, my US history students, and we were talking about Dr. King. And Dr. King was 25 years old when he was involved in the Montgomery bus boycott. So Casper came to this pretty late in his life. He involved in other things. And by the time we got to 1917, he saw what was happening in the Virgin Islands. He got involved in the movement. But he turned out to be a true hero, more in the Virgin Islands than probably on the mainland, because the mainland, you'd find people talk about his involvement in the numbers game and this great Bolito King and all that kind of stuff. But in the Virgin Islands, there's a generation of people who were born up after the turn of the century, who really hold him in high esteem. Examine Karen Tolan's book, neighborhoods of Christensen. I think she covered from like 1910 to 1960 in that book. She interviewed some interesting people. She interviewed Cyril Barnes and Miss Alice Peterson. And in those interviews, you see the high esteem in which that generation actually hold Casper Holstein. They talk about him in a great way, but they talk about him in a way of his political leadership and his generosity to the Virgin Islands. So that's very, very important when you actually look at it that way. They never talked about much about the gambling thing and the gangster thing, because to them that wasn't important. That wasn't the main thing that they knew about him. He also came from a pretty interesting family, centered in Christensen for a number of generations. His mother was a woman named Emily Holstein. She was born in 1859. She was a Lutheran. His grandmother was born in 1840 in St. Croix also. She was a house servant. His great grandmother, Annie Wink, was born in 1803. She was also born in St. Croix. And the interesting thing here is his great-great-grandmother was born in 1785, and she was born in Africa. So Casper Holstein have this connection to Africa. I'm not sure what he knows about it, what he knew about it. I'm not sure if his family told him about his great-great-grandmother, but she lived a while. She lived a long time, and so I'm sure he probably heard something about her. That family also have some other people who you may know. His aunt, Emily Peterson, she, out of her line came the Bows and the Fabios. And then she had some other brothers and sisters who lived in Christensen also, like John Johnson and James Johnson. They lived in Christensen. So there's a number of people in Christensen who actually are connected to Casper Holstein. On his father's side, his father was Albert J. Joseph. He was born in 1837. He was also a Lutheran. He was a butcher. And his grandfather was Daniel Joseph, born in 1791. He was also a butcher. He was a Lutheran as well. Albert Joseph Daniel Joseph didn't have a lot of children. I think he had 2 or 3 children. I think Casper had a sister for sure who was Margaret. And the house they lived in, 17 Prince Street for a long time, was actually in her name, you know. But the interesting thing about Albert Joseph is Albert Joseph had a lot of children with women. So interesting, Casper Holstein was baptized. Another one of Albert Joseph's children was baptized the same day in the same church. So that was probably pretty interesting, probably a pretty interesting event with a different woman. So that's the kind of thing. I don't know how many children he had in all. He may have had, 12, 13 children with different women. Might even be more than that, because the rumors is that they're more than that. But on the Joseph side, he has a lot of family in St. Croix as well. Professor Gloria Joseph was his great niece, I believe. She was the daughter of Daniel Joseph. Yes, and I think Daniel was his nephew. And he had a good relationship with Daniel. And then I have some cousins personally. I have some cousins who are actually related to him. My cousin, Annabelle Hewitt Compton, I should say. Her mother was Casper Holstein's great niece. Casper Holstein's brother, Richard, was her grandfather. In fact, his son was a guy by the name of Cyril Joseph, her father. So, a lot of people in St. Croix actually probably related to Casper Holstein. Casper Holstein was also born in a very interesting time. one could make the argument that he was born in a very turbulent century, the 19th century, because in 1848 you had the Emancipation, which was a very serious uprising would lead to the end of slavery. And interestingly enough about that event, his father was born before 1848. His grandfather was born before 1848. His grandmother was born before 1848. And his mother wasn't. So many people in his family was actually born during the 1848 slave revolt. And so he had to know something about that because even his father was born then. But in 1878, he was actually born. He was born in 1877. So he was born during the labor uprising of 1878. And a lot of his family members, of course, was born during that period as well. The question, though, is what impact these things probably had on his life? And I think they had a significant impact on his life. Because as a young person growing up, you would hear about these things. And he had to have heard about slavery. I mean, slavery was, you know, most Caribbean people who were involved in slavery, who knew about slavery, even young people talk about some of the things that happened during slavery because it's such an integral part of our lives. But 1878 was interesting because he was born and he had to know about what happened during that labor uprising. But at the same time, he would learn about how people are treated. That's why these events actually happen. So he would learn about how Blacks in the Danish West Indies were actually treated in this time period. And it wasn't good. And even though these things happened before he was born, when he was very, very young, he had to have seen a lot of this treatment in the Danish West Indies. You know, one of the things people don't understand is the Danish West Indies and colonies period, they're not there to improve the life of the Black laborers. They're there to improve the life, or they're there to actually help the colony, to help the colonial master, not the colony. And so people in these colonies struggled significantly. They didn't do well, you know? And even up to when Casper Holstein left, people in the Danish West Indies were doing poorly, see? Casper lived in what people would call today the Frigate area. And a lot of Blacks lived in the Frigate. Before slavery was over, this is where they were actually relegated to live, I should say. The interesting thing about this also is in 1755, the Danes passed a regulation which actually made Blacks free colors. The Danes didn't follow that regulation. The Danes actually created their own regulations. And by creating the regulations, they actually changed things for this free colored population. Because now they actually regulated the type of clothes they could wear, where they could live, you know. And so the Frigate area would make sense. It's called this Frigate where the free colors could live. The type of jobs they could have. All those things were regulated. And so you find that it still became difficult even if you were free colored or free person, even after slavery, living in the Danish West Indies, because these things actually continued for a long time. And so if you look at Casper's family, for example, his father was a butcher. That was a typical job of this period. You had his mother and his grandmother doing jobs like seamstress, and no, his mother was a seamstress, and people, his grandmother I think was a washerwoman, and these type of jobs. These were the jobs that they actually had. So it wasn't easy for Blacks in this society to live. And one has to question whether or not the young people who were growing up in these type of societies had the opportunity to do well, you see? And at some point, Casper's mother probably asked that question herself. can my son do well in this society? And, you know, a lot of people were migrating during this period. And so she probably thought about that. Because the truth is, there was a lot of people. The Danish society was so rough on Black laborers and Black people who lived in it that the infant mortality rate was high. People were dying of a lot of diseases. The laborers had a hard time, those who worked on the plantation. That type of hard work and all these diseases that were actually going around and killing people made life very hard for them. A lot of people were actually leaving. And so when we came to 1889, it seems like Casper's mother made a decision to actually take him out of the VI. And more than likely they had family in the States, probably where she would actually take him. She would take him to Brooklyn. They would migrate, they would actually jump on a ship called I think it was the Mary something, I can't remember now off the top of my head, but that ship would actually take them to New York. And that ship actually, when they actually got to New York, he ended up, from what I understand from the literature, he ended up going to school in Brooklyn. They went to Brooklyn. And it wasn't unusual for people from the islands to actually go to New York, and definitely not to Brooklyn. And he actually went to school here. But you know, I'm not sure, I haven't found this in the literature. I'm not sure who he stayed with. I'm not sure if his mother actually stayed in New York. That's a good question. I'm still looking at that. But we know he left when he was about 10 years old. And so the idea to actually take him to New York was quite typical of that time. A lot of West Indians were living in New York. More than likely, he had family living in New York. And he eventually graduated and stayed in New York for a long time. And ironically, he took a while before he came back to the Virgin Islands. When you follow the records, you're going to find that his first trip back, I believe, was like in 1918. And he was already, I mean, pretty old when he actually came back for the first time. And it appeared that he didn't really come back to do any political work or anything like that. He came back to visit. He spent time with David Hamilton Jackson. David Hamilton Jackson at the time was in the middle of the whole, not just the labor crisis, the labor issues that were taking place in the Virgin Islands. But at that point, the Navy had, the islands were transferred to the Navy, and the Navy was actually in charge. And the Navy was in the Virgin Islands, and David Hamilton Jackson got involved in that as well. And this transfer didn't turn out well for Virgin Islanders. In fact, I think a lot of Virgin Islanders believed before the transfer happened that they were going to live under the American flag and the Americans were going to be great, great to them. And it turned out that the Americans did almost nothing for them. If you were a Black Virgin Islander at the time, you didn't gain any power. Your conditions didn't get any better, and maybe a little bit, because wherever the U.S. goes, they tend to actually improve some things, and so they did improve some things. You saw better roads, and you saw, you know, dams being built and water catchment and sanitation a little bit better. But improvement also has something to do with fairness and equality, and that didn't change. In fact, Virgin Islanders complained quite a bit about how the Navy actually treated the citizens. And so I think this is what brought Casper into the political realm. I think when he came to the Virgin Islands and he saw how things were going, and he actually met up with David Hamilton Jackson, he began to get involved in the politics of the Virgin Islands. Because before that, he was actually doing his own thing in a sense. I mean, he was living in New York and he had different jobs, and he wasn't quite that involved in this particular movement. But he got involved, I think, after he came home. One of the things you're going to find about Casper Holstein as well is that once he got involved, he became very big in doing philanthropic work, not just in the Virgin Islands, but all over. Casper Holstein actually used his money to do a lot of work in a lot of places. The Harlem Renaissance, for example, that took place in the 1920s, so much of that money that actually made that whole period work was Casper Holstein's money. When you look at a lot of the prizes that Opportunity Magazine and all these different entities were given to writers, even big writers like Zora Neale Hurston and those kinds of people, probably benefited from his money. You see, so the Harlem Renaissance probably wouldn't be the same. Even the movement, the Marcus Garvey movement, would probably not be the same, believe it or not. Casper Holstein had a relationship with Marcus Garvey, and Garvey benefited from Casper Holstein's money, and of course, Casper Holstein benefited somewhat too from Garvey's movement because Garvey had access to a magazine that he published, like Negro World. Casper Holstein wrote in Negro World quite a bit, and other people he knew placed articles in Negro World. So there's a connection that happened between the two of them that was pretty good. And in fact, it turned out to be bad, to be honest, in the long run, because they actually fell out. Casper Holstein gave money to Marcus Garvey for one of the ships for the Black Star Line, and he never got paid back, and he eventually took him to court. So wasn't all good. Casper also gave money to places like girls' school in Africa to help people there. He gave money to a lot of young people, not just young people, but a lot of universities as well. A lot of the HBCUs benefited from Casper's money. He gave a lot of money to them, and very generous. I mean, and other organizations he gave money to. And then he gave up a lot of money to the VI. You know, people probably heard about the 1924, 1928 hurricanes that actually hit the Virgin Islands. And this one is well documented, that he gave tons of money to help people in the Virgin Islands with those storms. And so you'll find that even when it happened in the old newspapers, they'll talk a little bit about that. They also talk about, after those hurricanes, about him purchasing a dairy farm in Estate, Jerusalem, and Hope. And this is a property that happened. This purchase actually happened. He bought these two estates from a planter by the name of Moore, and the word is he developed them into a dairy farm. From interviewing people who are a bit familiar with it, my cousins, they said that in fact Daniel, and this you can find this in Geraldo Gordy's book as well. His nephew Daniel came down to do some of the work on the farm, and the idea was to produce milk for the people of the Virgin Islands, children of the Virgin Islands, and that sort of stuff. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't found a lot of the information about that part of it, the production of milk and all of that stuff. But there's no question that he actually had these estates and he actually started developing them. How the estate actually changed hands, again, that's something I'm working on currently. I gotta get the documents for that. But we know in 1940, these two estates were sold to Ralph Chabert, and eventually his wife would sell them to what will become Hess Oil Corporation. So that's how the estates actually exchanged hands. And then, again, a lot of supplies, we talked about it, a lot of supplies were sent at different times as well, not just these two hurricanes, but Casper Holstein actually tried to put a lot of, as much as he could, of supplies and money into the Virgin Islands. That's why, as I said, a generation of people actually talk about him in that way. His philanthropic work and his money didn't stop just with strangers. In fact, This is his, I believe, his great nephew, his sister's grandson, James Bow, who would be going to become pretty prominent in the Virgin Islands. Casper is believed to have sent him to school, went to school in Puerto Rico first, and then he did his law degree at Columbia University. He would become an assistant attorney general. Very, very prominent guy. But it's believed that Casper Holstein actually mentored him. And you could tell because he ended up joining, you know, the Congressional Council and Casper Holstein, the organization Casper Holstein was in. So he was involved, he got involved in this whole fight to end the naval administration in the Virgin Islands and to develop a civil government, that sort of thing. He was involved in the Organic Act. So this young man actually ended up, at the time he was pretty young, he ended up doing pretty well for the Virgin Islands. The question though is, how is Casper Holstein viewed today? And I had the opportunity to look at a lot of things that were written about Casper Holstein, a number of articles and a number of books written on Casper Holstein. But today is a whole different thing. When you look at some of this, right now HBO has a series called, I think it's Boardwalk Empire, about this gangster, black gangster from Harlem. It's based on Casper Holstein. The character is based on Casper Holstein. That character is pretty violent, actually. And this character is involved in bootlegging and a lot of different things. I don't really talk a lot about that side of Casper Holstein because I think it's overdone. But the truth of the matter is, Casper Holstein was never involved to the point where the FBI, he was on an FBI radar or anything like that. In fact, I'm probably gonna share this letter with some people who are doing the same presentation. The FBI actually, there's a guy who actually wrote to the FBI. The guy was actually working, there's a guy working for the VI Corporation at the time. It's one of the times when Casper Holstein came back home and he was mad because Casper Holstein, at this point, I think it was around 35, he had gotten so involved in the movement at this point, man, that this guy wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover, which I have the letter. He wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover asking him to deal with Casper Holstein because Casper Holstein is coming to the Virgin Islands creating a lot of corruption and a lot of, he's have the laborers going crazy and all that kind of stuff. And J. Edgar Hoover wrote back and said, you know, we don't deal with that. This is more of a local matter. So we know that he wasn't really some big time gangster who was on the FBI radar. He just wasn't that guy. In fact, the numbers game was for most part overlooked in New York for a long time. The police didn't do anything about it, right? So I don't like what's happening with the character, the characters that these people are developing based on Casper Holstein. It's just not fair, actually. If you want to know how important Casper Holstein was to the Virgin Islands, when he died, I think it was 1944, when he died, almost every newspaper had a clipping somewhere, or not a headline, but they mentioned him. The great Bolito King died and all this crazy stuff. But when you came to the Virgin Islands, there's a memorial service here held at Lutheran Church in Christensen. And hundreds of people showed up for that memorial service. Hundreds showed up. And he was honored. I guess you could call it, the eulogy was done by David Hampton Jackson. But people were very, very upset that they had lost a great Virgin Islands hero. See, so that's the way I look at Casper Holstein. He did a lot for the Virgin Islands. He's a great subject to study for young people because you would find a lot more than's out there, than is out there. He's done a great deal for the people of the Virgin Islands. So that's where I'm going to stop. I want to say there's a lot more that's coming from the people who are also doing this. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in New York organization. You could see his leadership through these other presentations that you're going to hear. Thanks a lot to the Society of the Virgin Islands Society of Historians who actually put this together. I was glad to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hewitt. We will save the questions until all the presenters have completed. And I see we have some members of the education community who are here with us, and we implore you to become members and also visit our website, vihistorians.net. I'll put it in the chat, and become members and presenters of the future. So I know the department is very proud of Mr. Hewitt. Next, we have Carl Christensen. Carl was born in St. Croix and migrated to New York in 1946. He attended grammar school and public high school there, graduated from Fordham University in New York City with a degree in finance, and entered the US Navy in 1955. He worked on Wall Street with a brokerage firm of Merrill Lynch and manufacturer Hanover Bank from 1960 to 1970. He returned home and worked with the Virgin Islands National Bank, the People's Bank, and with Small Business Administration from 1970 to 2015. He first presented his paper on Casper Holstein as part of the Rotary Mid-Isle 2019 Black History Month observation. We present to you Carl Christensen.
Again, Mr. Christensen recorded his lecture, and I will play that video for you now.
As a young boy of my era, growing up on St. Croix, I had always heard of Casper Holstein. And what Casper Holstein meant to the Virgin Islands, especially to my home, St. Croix. He had always been my secret or hidden hero until doing research for this report. Now he is my public, most highly admired Virgin Islands hero. In my opinion, an amazing individual. You got that one, right? Although born 60 years apart, almost to the day, his upbringing from birth to a young man replicated mine to a large extent, making it easy to clearly understand. He was born Egbert Joseph, December 7th, 1876, in Christensen, of mixed African and Danish descent. His father was a land and mulatto owner of a large farm, who was in turn the son of a Danish officer in the Danish West Indies colonial militia, as was my grandfather. He moved to New York with his mother at the age of 12 and lived in Harlem. I moved at the age of 9 with my father, lived in Harlem, and we both graduated high school and joined the Navy. After leaving the Navy should have been there.
Yes.
Oh, okay. After leaving the Navy, we both worked on Wall Street for a commodities brokerage firm, and here's where our lives took vastly different turns. It was there that he combined U.S. Customs House receipts, New York Stock Exchange daily share volume, and leading horse race parimutuel betting to create his daily numbers racket. As prohibition began, Holstein's lottery system proved popular, and soon he became known as the Bolita King, going on to earn in his prime $12,000 a day. By the end of the 1920s, he had become a millionaire and dominant figure among Harlem's policy operators. The New York Times called him Harlem's favorite hero because of his rascally Robin Hood ways. He was a tremendous philanthropist and gave much of his money away. He was admired by the masses and reportedly circulated with the cream of the crop of Harlem society. But unlike the upper crust, his giving was unlimited. He would give 500 baskets of food and gifts at Christmas time, contributed to a vast number of charities, and built dormitories at Black colleges. He gave money to Black artists, Black causes, and Black magazines. He funded a Baptist school in Liberia and founded a museum. Holstein was considered the only Black patron of the arts. Noted poet Langston Hughes stated that he was a great help to poor poets. He bought the mortgage on the New York Hall of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and allowed it to continue to be used as Black farm. Our organization, developed as Holstein Court and Professionals. According to Virgin Islands Department of Education biography, who attended Harvard, Columbia, NYU, Howard, Hampton, and other institutions of undergraduate, graduate, and professional levels. In addition, Holstein generously contributed to the education of young people in the Caribbean. In New York, he was looked upon as some sort of messiah. His financial support to Virgin Islanders at home was considerable. After a devastating hurricane in 1924, he established a hurricane relief fund of $100,000. When another storm struck in 1928, he chartered a steamship to deliver lumber and other building materials, and even sent tradesmen from New York to help residents rebuild their homes. Holstein also purchased an estate on St. Croix, imported purebred cattle from the States, and established a dairy farm from which free milk was distributed to needy children. Holstein also wrote a regular column in the Negro World, as well as articles for the NAACP newspaper, The Crisis. We have to remember this was the era of the Harlem Renaissance, which started in the 1920s and developed as a result of an African consciousness movement and grew out of the racial pride and a sense of connection to Black people around the world. The literature, art, and scholarship became well known as a result of careful networking by 7 visionaries and well-connected African Americans. W.E.B. Du Bois, Jesse Forsett, James Weldon Johnson, Walter White, Elaine Locke, and Casper Holstein, Harlem's number racket king. Holstein's apparent unselfish generosity to numerous worthy causes generally served to protect his reputation, though many in Harlem knew he acquired his wealth through the illegal numbers operations. In early newspapers, he was referred to as merely a wealthy Harlem businessman. However, on August the 3rd, 1927, the Amsterdam News reported an apartment said to own by Casper Holstein, philanthropist and erstwhile disciple of Marcus Garvey at 507 Lenox Avenue near 135th Street was raided Friday afternoon by police sent out to round up Numbers bankers. It is unclear why the papers printed Holstein's name in connection with a Numbers raid when the paper had not previously done so. In any case, on August 17th, the general manager with a libel complaint alleging that his credit, reputation, and general standing in the community had been damaged by the paper to the extent of $100,000. Apparently, the suit was later dropped and settled out of court. In truth, the community was unaffected by the Amsterdam News report. He continued to meet socially with key political figures. Alderman Fred R. Moore, owner of the newspaper The Age, and Mrs. Moore were the special guests at an annual ladies' night dinner sponsored by Holstein Turf Club in February 1928. Moore made a brief address complimenting the club and its founder for the splendid charitable work that he had done in the community. Neither the Age nor the Amsterdam News focused on Holstein's Caribbean background, unless in reference to his connection with the well-known Virgin Islands Congressional Council. In 1935, Holstein was kidnapped by a Jewish gangster from the Bronx. Had been trying years to put in but puzzled when he was returned as suddenly as he had disappeared after 5 days, without having to pay the $50,000 ransom that had been demanded, and refused to assist police in the capture of the perpetrator. Because some Harlem residents suspected the kidnapping was a hoax, but cigarettes, burns, bruises, and evidence that Holstein had paid up to $30,000 quickly convinced skeptics, and increasing violence against other black bankers by white mobsters made Holstein kidnapping look like a general invasion of the black numbers industry. One former Harlem resident recalled that Holstein, the most successful black operator, was reported ordered to get out of the numbers business. Schultz's gang then bought out the cops and took over the business in 1931, after which Holstein retired. But Schultz was gunned down by his fellow mobsters in 1935. The same year, the New York Times called Holstein a benefactor of Negro equality. In 1931, when Holstein retired, he retired completely and devoted his time to large legitimate business and the Virgin Islands Congressional Council. As with a few other leading numbers bankers, Holstein focused not only on business, but on social and political issues that tied him even closer to the native-born and immigrant Harlem. His concentration on securing equal political rights for Black Virgin Islands eventually drained his financial resources. But his support of the movement for a civil government was believed to be a key factor in the removal of the U.S. naval rule. The governor of the new civil administration, a white Southerner, was unpopular, and mass movement of home people and New York Virgin Islanders, led by Holstein, resulted in his removal in 1935. But his resources dwindled. Holstein found he had few friends among white establishment politicians. His legitimate business began to fold during the Great Depression, and having no protection downtown, he was constantly followed and harassed by police. In 1937, he was finally arrested at one of his clubs and indicted as a numbers banker, though he had reportedly quit the business years before. Convicted and spent 1 year in prison. He got out of prison at the start of World War II. He died in April 1944, a poor man at the age of 67. More than 2,000 people attended his funeral. According to Mr. Geraldo book, Harlem's Danish American West Indies, 1899 to 1964, Holstein wrote in 1945, and I quote, "You cannot enjoy half slavery and half freedom. We want it all or nothing. We don't want to be revolutionists. We don't want to be communists. We don't wish to be branded against organized government. We want to be the same as every American of this American nation, and we are entitled to that privilege. I am told you cannot oppose government, but by God, government can hear us cry and must hear us protest. And we are going to protest until we get the kind of government we wish."
We're now going to take a break of 10 minutes. That gives everybody some time to get up and stretch and get a glass of water. The chat, to ask you questions on the chat also, that we will address at the end. All right, thank you. Nineteen 20. Good morning, everybody. We are ready to start again, but before we start, I would like to announce that one of our members, Nina York, has written a book, Our Danish Connection, and it is a reproduction of the articles in St. Croix this week, plus a translation of those articles. And the book, Our Danish Connection, can be purchased at Undercover Books in St. Croix and through the Danish West Indian Society in Copenhagen. And so I believe that it's $30, if I'm not mistaken, is the cost in St. Croix.
Sorry, Betsy, it's $20.
Oh, it's $20. All right, thank you. And it's in joint publication with the Danish West Indian Society and the St. Croix Friends of Denmark. And now Susan will introduce our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Mr. Chester Williams, was born on St. Croix and pursued early education there. He migrated to New York and graduated from the James Monroe High School in Bronx, New York. He then enrolled in Pratt Institute for a year and later was drafted into the Army and served for 2 years with the 11th Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He returned to Pratt and graduated with a degree in advertising. During his 14 years working in advertising, he was a member of the Virgin Islands organizations in the city. In 1967, he returned to St. Croix and was employed by the Virgin Islands Department of Labor as a recruitment officer, placing returning islanders in employment positions. In 1974, Williams became the executive director of the Virgin Islands Council for Vocational Education. In 1988, He joined the staff of UVI's Small Business Development Center and 5 years later became its director. We present Mr. Chester Williams.
So Mr. Williams has pre-recorded his lecture, and we will play that video now.
I moved to New York in the summer of 1947 after I graduated from junior high school in Christensen. My parents had already established themselves in the Bronx. My father went up in 1945, my mother in 1946. I liked living in the Bronx. We were on Southern Boulevard. Crotona Park was nearby and a safe place to enjoy, even at night. The Bronx Zoo was just a few subway stops away, and I could walk to James Monroe High School without sweating. High school was fun. I soon realized that junior high school in St. Croix had prepared me well, so well that in 12th grade, I was placed in a program called the Cooperative Course, where we worked in businesses in the city while we attended high school. We had jobs to go to every other week and school every other week. After high school, I enrolled in Pratt Institute and found a job in an advertising and public relations agency as a mailroom clerk. After work, I would get on the subway and bus to Pratt in Brooklyn. After classes at night, I would get on the bus and subway to the Bronx. I was young and eager to learn, and it did not seem difficult at all. Lo and behold, I was drafted in 1953 and had to put job and school on the shelf until I came out of the Army in 1955. After the Army, I went back to my job and school and eventually received a degree in advertising design from Pratt Institute as I moved up in the advertising industry in New York. I eventually got married, bought a house, got 3 children, and kept moving up. In the mid-1950s, I found out about the VI organizations in New York and moved in that direction. The rest is history. The American Virgin Islands Civic Association Incorporated. The association was established in February 1931. It was created in order to give representation to the people of the Virgin Islands and their families, both at home and on the US mainland. Early on, the officers were Ashley L. Totten, President, Julius A. Thomas, first vice president, Ralph J. Bow, second vice president, Oscar B. Hall, secretary treasurer, James A. Perry, assistant secretary. The president, Ashley L. Totten, was the secretary of the powerful union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He and the union president, Mr. A. Philip Randolph, were able to get the attention of mainland politicians in support of Virgin Islands causes. The Civic Association was as well as the other Virgin Islands organizations in New York, was famous for its social affairs. The organization held annual dances at the Rockland Palace. The orchestras of choice were Lloyd and Dewes and his Calypso Orchestra, and Fess Finley and his band. Looking back, it is amazing that admissions were only $1.75 and $2 at that time. The Civic Association also held raffles to benefit summer camps for children. The Civic was the official publication of the association and became a reality in April of 1953. Its purpose was to serve as a medium of communication for everyone interested in the growth and progress of the American Virgin Islands. The editorial staff of the Civic consisted of Edward B. O'Reilly, James L. Wilson, MD, and Charles C. Rubel, who was the editor. At times, the Civic would champion Virgin Islands causes, and there were occasions when the publication opposed the stances of the political leaders back home. It appeared that bad blood developed between the Civic and VI politicians, and they would indulge in negative press releases against each other. The public lost interest in the Civic and it folded when the editorial staff left to form another Virgin Islands-oriented newspaper. The American Virgin Islands Civic Social Group. It was formed in September 1956 by a group of young adults from the US Virgin Islands. The group operated under the auspices of the 27-year-old American Virgin Islands Civic Association. The group was a civic and social club formed to encourage young people to assume civic responsibilities, to extend worthwhile benevolent services, and to enjoy recreation and mutual friendship. At that time, the board of directors consisted of the following members: Mr. Chester R. Williams, Miss Irma Grant, Mr. Norman Seeley, Miss Eunice Williams, Miss Gloria Williams, and Mr. Earl Brady. Among the civic activities, the group sponsored an essay contest among Virgin Islands schools in 1957, entitled "The Need for a Junior College in the Virgin Islands." The Professional League of Virgin Islanders was another Virgin Islands organization in New York. That organization would present its Heritage Series programs, which were annual awards presentations. The League was also famous for its annual extravaganza Calypso balls, utilizing the Manhattan Center Ballroom, with the orchestra of choice being the Claude Brewster Orchestra. Another group, the Benevolent Society of the American Virgin Islands, Incorporated. Another, the Ladies' Aid of the American Virgin Islands. Another, the American Virgin Islands Prudential Association. Then there was the Caribs. That was another Virgin Islands organization. They were known to have social functions to raise money to send underprivileged children to summer camps. Their orchestra of choice was Claude Brewster and his Calypso Boys. The American Virgin Islands Society Incorporated was another organization in New York. They were known to have presented their gala 60th anniversary dance at the Park Palace Ballroom in November of 1959. Their orchestra of choice was Claude Brewster and his boys. The American Virgin Islands Independent Publication. The organization was founded in December of 1957. It was formed to work toward the social, cultural, economic, political advancement and general welfare of American Virgin Islanders, both at home and abroad. The officers of the organization were Chester R. Williams, President, John J. Anthony, Vice President, Oscar B. Hall, Secretary, and Edgar B. Hall, Treasurer. The organization established in April of 1958 a monthly newspaper known as the Mainland Virgin Island Voice. The editorial staff of the VI Voice were Charles C. Rubel, Edward B. O'Reilly, Chester R. Williams, and Zeph Nesbitt. Miss Una Ricardo and Mr. James A. Benison were also contributors to the publication. The Virgin Islands Public Affairs Council, VIPAC. VIPAC was organized in October of 1953. The organization was formed to give representation to Virgin Islanders and for their causes by an assembly of concerned and unified individuals who could get the attention and respect from all, including the US Congress. The officers were Geraldo Gertie, President, Mrs. Clarice Mulgrave, Vice President, Elsie Steele, Executive Secretary, Walter Gumbs, Treasurer, Mario Watlington, Chairman of the Legislative Committee, and Edgar Mulgrave, Director of Activities. The organization had an impressive list of early members, and its advisory board included political leaders from the Virgin Islands and the US mainland. Among the honorary members who wanted to associate with VIPAC were a New York State Senator and a city Supreme Court judge. The VIPAC office was established at 501 West 145th Street in New York City, and branches were planned for the VI. One of the first positions taken by the group was to make a donation to the NAACP. The next significant contribution of VIPAC was to hold an honorarium for the well-known actor Sidney Poitier. As a model achievement for Black youth, the actor received VIPAC Initial Merit Certificate at a grand reception in New York. Another public relations opportunity organized by VIPAC was the changing of the street signs naming New York's Times Square as Virgin Islands Square for 3 days. That was on March 29, 1957, in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the US Virgin Islands. Governor Ralph Paiwanski requested the same honor in 1967 for the 50th anniversary. Other contributions of VIPAC were entertaining the contestant to the Miss United States pageant in 1956, assisting a fundraising activity for the College of the Virgin Islands, and assistance in the early recruitment efforts for the Virgin Islands government. VIPAC had always been a supporter of having a native Virgin Islander as governor of the Virgin Islands, and had given its support to that cause from the time the VI Legislative Assembly petitioned the US President about that appointment. The leadership of VIPAC changed in 1964 when Geralda Gertie left New York to return home to St. Thomas. Chester Williams was elected the new president. VIPAC later developed a couple of publications to keep its members and followers informed. One was the newsletter, and the other was VIPAC Topics. The leadership of VIPAC changed again in 1966 when Chester Williams, who was planning to return home to St. Croix in the following year, resigned. The organization elected Halva James to the presidency. Chester Williams went back home to work with the recruitment program in the VI Department of Labor. The American Virgin Islands Unity Council of New York was formed on April 18, 1959 by officers of other Virgin Islands organizations. It was formed to help to secure a greater measure of political freedom and improve economic standards for the people at home, and to provide social, legal, and related services for Virgin Islanders on the mainland. The founding organizations were the American Virgin Islands Society, the Virgin Islands Congressional Council, the Ladies' Aid of the American Virgin Islands, the Virgin Islands Public Affairs Council, and the American Virgin Islands Independent Publication. The elected officers of the Unity Council were Alberta Senior, President, Mrs. Valerie Robinson, Vice President, Geraldo Gertie, Executive Secretary, and Zeph Nesbitt, Treasurer. Some of the other leaders of the organizations were Charles Rubel, Christian Lewis, and Mario Watlington, and Walter Gums, as well as a number of female representatives. Member organizations were represented in the council by the respective presidents and delegates. A major accomplishment of the council was its sponsorship of the Virgin Islands Repertory Theater's production of the play Medea in June 1960 in New York City. This is a photograph of the United Virgin Islands, New York Virgin Islanders, and that was in 1948. I had just arrived in New York a year before that, so I was a baby almost. I don't recognize any of those people. Some of them are familiar from photographs that I've seen before. But that goes to show that things happened before I got there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. And don't forget Everybody's here to answer the questions. We're keeping track of all the questions, and we'll get to that very soon. Our final presenter today is our fearless leader, Elizabeth Rizzinde, and she's a retired Virgin Islands government employee of 31 years. She taught English at Central High and at Arthur Richards Junior High. She worked as a reading and cultural education specialist and a research and a development officer for the Division of Libraries. She taught Virgin Islands and Caribbean history at the University of the Virgin Islands for 28 years. She has written extensively on the neighborhoods of Christensen, Gallows Bay, Freegut, and Watergut. Most recently, she has focused on the political activism of the Virgin Islands diaspora in New York City and D. Hamilton Jackson's 1915 visit to that community. Pleased to present Dr. Elizabeth Rizzinde. Thank you.
Good day, participants of the Society of Virgin Islands Historians. Welcome to our annual meeting. My topic is Casper Holstein and the Congressional Council from Transfer Day 1917 to Citizenship 1927. In front of me, see the picture of Casper Holstein. This is his passport picture for naturalization. Casper Alexander Joseph Holstein. He puts his whole name across the picture because that's what he is required to do by the Immigration and Naturalization. Even before the very public series of events, the raid on his home, the kidnapping, and the loss of his nightclubs, Casper Holstein had turned his attention to finding solutions to the conditions of the Virgin Islanders, both in Harlem and in the islands. He had in 1893, the good fortune to visit St. Thomas, still under Danish regime. At that time, as a naval sailor on the USS Saratoga, which was on shore leave, he saw for the first time the deteriorating infrastructure of the island. Major public works renovations were needed for the roads, the water sanitation system, and the reorganization of health clinics and hospitals. In 1917, he financed his own travel by ship to witness the Transfer Day ceremonies and listen to the men of the Black middle class regarding their expectations of the naval administrations. For the next few years, Holstein became a sounding board for Virgin Islanders. He received their letters, greeting card, and welcomed once-a-year visitors to New York City. As the years of the naval regime passed, Virgin Islanders became more displeased with their newly appointed administration. The naval officers had seen a way to preserve white supremacy by continuing with Danish law of 1906. Through this persistent legislation, there were restrictions against expanding the vote of the adult men, prolonging the paternalistic practice of appointing representatives to speak for the and for the sentencing of stiff penalties for vagrancy offenses. While several public works projects were initiated, the naval administrators and members of Congress believed that Virgin Islands community needed to grow up in maturity within the American system of democracy. One early governor insisted that, quote, no political gains will be allowed to the residents until a generation has elapsed, unquote. Virgin Islanders paid a high price for needed public works projects. Their dignity and character was besmirched in the naval personnel's treatment of so-called infractions, occurring especially during the night watches of the Marines. Virgin Islanders' suggestions and opinions were constantly belittled. and they were never considered for government positions. Holstein complained why naval governors from the state were chosen instead of those from the South, who had treated Virgin Islanders as they had done to African Americans. Following the complaints, Holstein in 1919 sent Ashley Totten and Elizabeth Hendrickson to observe and report on living conditions. Both Totten and Hendrickson had been activists within the Virgin Islands segment of the Harlem community. In 1920, Casper Holstein was a staunch Democrat and followed a number of prominent Democrats in Washington. He joined the politically motivated organization, the Virgin Islands Congressional Council of New York, established by Anselmo Jackson. VIers had considered themselves as an integral part of the U.S. Under D. Hamilton Jackson's lead on St. Croix, the Black middle class, the Black middle class had commemorated Citizenship Day in 1918 and 1919. Until the Navy administration had distanced themselves from such celebrations. In the picture here, you will see it says Committee for the Commemoration of the Citizenship Day, January 17th, 1918 in Christensen. And in the middle there, right in the middle, you see D. Hamilton Jackson. In misunderstanding the source or the lack of their citizenship, Virgin Islanders had incorrectly assumed their place in American society. They believed that they were Americans as they paid taxes, had their children educated under the American system, and they were enjoying an overhaul in infrastructure of the society. In reality, they were neither able to vote nor run for office. They were required to travel to the mainland with a passport, and they were subject to arrest in their homeland for unfounded charges. Most of all, they were restricted from petitioning changes or expressing their opinions in a public manner. And here is the program for the Citizenship Day, and we see receipts and disbursements. This was taken from the newspaper, the West End News, by Pamphlet Leader. But it shows us there that on the list, Mr. Joseph Alexander, Ms. C. Grenaway, Mr. Gustav Lang, all right, and W.S. Abramson, Christian S. Forup, and R.H. Amplet Leader. And it shows the names, and if someone knows the picture that you saw previously, perhaps can put some of those names with the picture. Notice the detail that went into all of this. Notice that there are coconut buns and lemonade for the children, and lanterns and decorations and bunting for the buildings, and ribbons and flags for decorations. It was really a big day that D. Hamilton Jackson had planned. To achieve economic stability, Holstein realized that economic power was necessary through political empowerment. He sought a process for expansion of Virgin Islanders' civil and political rights. Achieving self-determination was necessary, and acquiring voting rights was certainly the foundation. Once listed as a voter, an individual could run for office, serve on a jury, and be part of the community's distribution of wealth. Still, in 1920, out of a population of 26,000 Virgin Islands residents, there were only 424 eligible male voters. In 1923, as president of the Virgin Islands Constitutional Council of New York, VICC, Casper Holstein became the official representative of the Virgin Islands New Yorkers with over 1,000 members, which represented, quote, a statistical significance, quote, for collective action. The group was ready to forge ahead on behalf of the islanders. Holstein's downtown experience had shown him that lobbying legislators to draw up bills to change laws was the tact that they had to take. In the first steps to gain political change, to fight for self-determination and citizenship, the VICC wrote a letter calling for the discontinuation of the naval rule and attempted to rally support for Congress's institution of civilian government. This was a large step for the 6th anniversary of Transfer Day, March 31st, 1923. Growing rivalries. 4 strong factions were working on seemingly opposite sides. The first group consisted of the officers of the Naval Administration, who were born and raised in the segregated South. In the islands, they had met a society in which the Danes formally ruled over a people in a paternalistic manner. As a holdover from the Danish times, voting rights had been given to the planters and the merchants who had met the income requirements. Without voting rights, the black middle class could not run for office. As in Danish times, there was still no trial by jury. The officers of the Naval Administration had set up their offices in the historic buildings and the barracks, retaining the influence of the European colonial regime. They continued the segregated practice of hosting parties in Government House, limiting the invitation list. Naval officers, governors realized that they had the power to disband the colonial council at will. They had the power to fire editors from their newspapers and jail them, and to harass those that they considered as agitators. With the Naval Administration, in which governors spoke directly with the presidents of the United States, there was no listening ear for Virgin Islanders to bring their complaints and suggestions. D. Hamilton Jackson, Rothschild Francis suffered from the Navy's administrative wrath. As time progressed, despite the numbers of petitions sent to the Naval Administration, officers ignored Virgin Islanders and New Yorkers' demands for self-determination. The only breakthrough was the formation of the Naval Band, which traveled to the US. So there were 2 bands that were formed. One was a youth or juvenile band, and then this was the older men. And Mr. McKay is here. It's very difficult to see the faces, but he was part of this, O'Geese McKay. And the Naval Band made a tour throughout the United States. They, of course, went to New York City so that the diaspora, the people from Virgin Islanders, could see and hear them in several different places in New York. And unfortunately, they were left without any money to be able to return back to the Virgin Islands. And Casper Holstein put his hand in his pocket and provided their return. All right, the second group, the second faction, consisted of 20,000 Virgin Islanders who had migrated to Harlem between the years 1880 and 1930. They were judging the island's administration from the vantage point of their stateside experiences, whether good or bad. Over the years, these Virgin Islander New Yorkers became members of the number of political groups, which were geared to the rehabilitation of the Virgin Islands government from afar. In their over-eagerness, they had taken on a metropolitan air which they had flaunted over their homeland, friends and family, with whom they felt were uneducated in political action and activity. And New Yorkers thus assumed an air of superiority. Lewis surmises that the New Yorkers approached making the changes in native government. They approached it as if they were, quote, writing the Declaration of Independence for the Virgins, unquote. The third group was the local Virgin Islanders who expressed jealousy over the array of political tactics their friends and relatives newly immigrated to New York could use to make their petitions known, such as utilizing person-to-person influence followed with a reinforcement of outright political gifts and donations. Lewis states these immigrants, quote, commanded sources of influence and money not available to their rivals in the islands, unquote. With these devices and the use of many more props in working to get the attention of the right people, New Yorkers' political consciousness had grown up over the course of their maturation, quote, under the heady influence of New York ghetto life, unquote. The fourth group was the Virgin Islanders at home, who had none of the mechanisms for change as was available in the US. Lewis calls them the progressive leaders, those men who were part of the Black middle class in the islands. They were cautionary in their political outlook and actions, and there were members who flatly admitted that the naval administration's reconstruction of the infrastructure of the islands outweighed the fact that there were no economic initiatives implemented. These individuals some of these individuals overlooked the treatment of native-born Virgin Islanders by the officers, even though they seemed to be public works progress in the islands. Additionally, the progressive leaders accused New Yorkers of being far from the source of information and had willingly misused information to make quick decisions and judgments. Lewis lists the result of the differences and the feeling between the New Yorkers and the resident Virgin Islanders as, quote, a virulent hatred between the rival sides, unquote. Holstein realized that just as states needed representation in Congress and the House of Representatives, the Virgin Islands needed a lobbying force to win political rights equal with those of other Americans. Halvard Berg had migrated to New York in 1921 and worked as a social worker for the New York City Department of Social Work after having graduated from Hampton Institute. He was quite possibly supported by Holstein. So too was James A. Bow, with a graduate degree in law from Columbia. He became Holstein's assistant at the VICC. Holstein was media savvy. He paid $1,000 to have a full-page ad in the Washington Post outlining the island's political history and position within the United States. And here is a picture of James A. Bow, and he has a long political history, starting in this Virgin Islands Congressional Council, and then returned home, and he worked for innumerable years. He wanted to become governor of the Virgin Islands, but every time he tried and campaigned, somebody else got the nomination. But he worked steadfastly in whatever he did. He was a true patriot of the islands. Under Holstein's direction, Berg's position was that of a lobbyist, the forerunner of the delegate to Congress, a non-voting position. Speaking before the House Committee on the Territorial and Insular Affairs, Berg was to get various legislators to comprehend the situation of the islands under the Navy and to act upon it by drawing up a civil government. Berg represented the people of the Virgin Islands in the 1924 Congressional hearing. To this gathering, Holstein had also provided transportation and hotel costs for representatives from the Virgin Islands in order to testify before Congress. Traveling from St. Croix were D.C. Canegata and D. Hamilton Jackson. From St. Thomas were Rothschild Francis and Lionel Roberts. In 1925, President Calvin Coolidge sent a fact-finding commission to the islands. Citizenship was hard won by Virgin Islanders in 1927. Conclusion. For 25 years, 1917 to 1942, Casper Holstein had used his wealth, political acumen, and his party-related influence to support lobbying efforts in Washington, first to repeal the naval administration and then to create a civilian government. With Virgin Islanders gaining citizenship and expanded equal rights, they were brought under the US Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. In working together for the civil government, the New Yorkers' abrasive and condescending manner towards homeland leaders led to a mistrust and resulted in a distant relationship between the two entities. Last week, former VI Smith's keynote address to the Symposium on Genealogy and History stated that the work of the delegate to Congress needs to be accompanied with greater political lobbying in Congress from individuals like us. She harks back to the day Congressional Council's participation in working together before such a position was created by the Organic Act of 1954. Just this past week, on Casper Holstein Day, December 7th, his birthday, he was honored by the radio station WSTA. He is remembered today with the warmth not only for his generosity to the people in times of need, but for his political vision of a homeland based on self-determination and freedom. With this conference, this is another example why Casper Holstein is not to be forgotten. Thank you.
This is a lot of information. We're very grateful to all the presenters. And now we'll have your questions. And the first question was about the Danish roots of Casper Holstein. And here we are live and direct from the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts. Here is Mr. Hewitt to answer the question, not recorded.
Good afternoon. Casper Holstein, Danish roots lies within his mother. His mother was Holstein, and her father was a Dane. Not much is known about him, though, and I don't think his mother actually knew much about her father at that, growing up. I don't think she knew much about him.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt. Next question.
Our next question is, how has Casper Holstein been honored in Virgin Islands history book and other ways, monuments or things named after him? How has Casper Holstein been honored in the Virgin Islands to this day? And we just heard that there was Casper Holstein Day was on December 7th. And yes, Sinclair Williams had the remembrance on WSTX. So first, to address how he's been honored in the history books, we will hear from first Mr. Hewitt again.
In the history books, you won't find a lot on Casper Holstein. I think a lot of honoring, there's been works written on him, articles, like the Turnbull book written on him. But in terms of the stuff you would find in schools, you wouldn't find a whole lot written on him. But we're fortunate to know that, I just talked to Dr. Rizzinde. She said Campo Rico housing was actually named after him. I didn't even know that. But the Casper Holstein Drive, which is near the National Garden in St. Croix, that was recently named. I can't remember what year exactly, but I know my good friend Taima Edwards was involved in that, lobbied for that to happen, and that happened. So you're beginning to see more people actually trying to honor Casper Holstein. Even this symposium we're having right now is kind of tribute to him.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt.
Would you like to add to that? Mr. Carl Christensen, would you like to add to that?
I know of
You could stay right there. I'll just move the camera.
I
Just
know,
speak up so the mic can pick it up.
I know the park, also over in St. Thomas, that's named for him. And like Ronald said, also the drive by the National Guard. And I just know it by word of mouth. It's popularity, really.
Mr. Williams, would you like to add to that?
No,
Any
I
other ways we
only know
know of?
what Mr. Hewitt and Mr. Christensen said, so.
Okay, the next question. When did Casper Holstein retire from the numbers games? And when did he join the Congressional Council?
Well,
Yeah, you're gonna need to, so you can hear.
there's two parts to that research. My part, I was noted that he retired in 1931. He didn't necessarily retire though, he was forced out. After the kidnapping, the business started moving. The white gangsters from the Browns Maitland Dutch Schultz started taking over the numbers racket. And they sort of pushed out the black numbers operators. And his business started going down. His involvement with the politics, I turned that over to Ron.
Actually, as I said in my my presentation, didn't really get involved in politics that early in his life. The literature you would see by the early 20s, he's involved in politics. As to the Congressional Council, in 1992, there was a big meeting, and I think it's a place called St. Mark Hall. That's where he actually made a speech, and it was, a number of speakers went before him. But when he came on, he started speaking and talking about what the Navy was doing in the Virgin Islands. I mean, first of all, the meeting was hot. People were very curious about what was going on in the Virgin Islands. And the applause he got for some of the remarks he made, and it was very radical, actually. He was actually saying the Navy is not going to put us back in slavery and that sort of stuff. I mean, some really powerful points he made. And it kind of, I think a lot of people who didn't know him in politics at that time in New York begin to embrace him and realize his leadership skills were pretty sound. He's going to actually get involved in the leadership of the Virgin Islands.
Okay, the next question is, Casper Holstein had close ties with Oscar DePriest, Arthur Werg, Mitchell, Louis Alderman, and Charles Anderson, all political officials. Can any of you comment on those relationships?
No, I don't.
Okay.
What are the names again?
Oscar DePriest, Arthur Wergs, Mitchell, Louis Alderman, and Charles Anderson, all political officials.
I don't know his relationship with them. Those are American politicians.
They can't
I
hear
don't
you.
follow
Can you go in front of them and say that?
I don't know any connection.
So there seems to be not a consensus of the answer to that question.
Something we need to research.
We will need to research. Thank you for the question. Next.
Also the names Irma Lee Grant in New York, and she later became a guidance counselor at Central High School. Can anybody expound on Irma Lee Grant? Yay.
Ms. Emily Grant was a member of a couple of our organizations during my tenure in New York. And I remember I think she took a trip to Denmark, and she did make a report when she came back, and she was quite active when she came back to St. Croix. But I remember her well.
Okay, and I believe I heard it said that there is a square in New York City named the Virgin Islands Square. Is that what we heard correctly?
Well, at one time, the Virgin Islands Public Affairs Council, VIPAC, was instrumental in having Times Square named as Virgin Islands Square. Geraldo Gerdy, the president, and his wife, president of VIPAC, they changed the street sign, and they named Times Square Virgin Islands Square for a weekend, I think it was. And 10 years later, Governor Paiwanski had that honor of having it done for, I think it was the 50th anniversary.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Another relative out there of Augusta Hanson. She's in the photo as a member of the American VI Council. And does anybody remember?
I don't remember her. No, it might have been the same time when I was in New York, but I'm not familiar with her.
Thank you. And did you, Mr. Williams?
No.
Did you ever have encounters with Rothschild Francis in New York? Or do you know of any programs and activities that he attended?
No, I have never met. I've been in the company of Mr. Francis. I'm not sure if it was during the time when I was in New York. I know he's very famous back in the Virgin Islands, especially in St. Thomas.
Thank you. And also Elizabeth Hendrickson and Amita Burnett. They were in leadership roles in this.
I can't remember Ms. Hendrickson, but I remember Ms. Burnett. I believe she was an attorney. I don't think she was very active, but she might have been involved to some degree during the time I was in New York. But I have heard her name mentioned during the years.
I could say something about Elizabeth.
And Dr. Rizzinde would like to add to that?
I know that Elizabeth Hendrickson was known as a very radical activist. She was in that ladies' auxiliary that you saw the pictures of in two of the presentations, but she was in the more known for being in the Tenants Association. Caribbean people were having difficulties with rent and with their landlords. They had very bad places to live. Maintenance was non-existent. The rents kept on going up and they weren't going to get anything more for their rents. So these women, and I think Burnett was there too, these women got together and they had rallies, they had street processions, they carried signs and placards, they were protesters. They tried the housing development of New York City and of Harlem to get more stable rent rates for people in the various apartments and housing in New York City.
Yes.
I know also of several West Indian families who use a very popular source of acquiring rent. It was called house parties. And it was very, very popular. They would open their apartment. They would charge like 25 cents for the person to come in. They would have calypso music, or all kinds of music. And then they would sell liquor and beer and sodas. And that was a very popular source because of the fact that where we were living, I experienced this myself. And it was really a slummy part of Harlem. And my family also participated in playing numbers. My mother got caught one time playing numbers. And when my father asked where she came, she missed out by a minute. And when she came back, huffing and puffing upstairs, my father asked her, what happened? She said, when she went to play the numbers, the police was there. So she ran back up 5 flights of stairs. My father asked her, what did you do with the number sheet? She said she swallowed it. Me, being brazen, a brazen 11-year-old, popped out, but mommy, that ain't cock you up. I got a slap upside my head. I can still feel up today.
Oh. And there's so much more to learn. Casper Holstein ran clubs in Harlem, the Turf Club, the Saratoga Club, as we've seen shared in the chat. And he had apartments, the Holstein Court Cooperative Apartments at Liberty Hall in New York. So this is the beginning. We've learned a lot today. And as we can see, this was a fantastic life lived well with a lot of ups and downs, very like a real roller coaster, but what a great source of inspiration he is for all of us today. And now we'll have our conclusion and parting words from Dr. Rizzinde.
I certainly agree that we learned a whole lot today from 4 different speakers on 4 different aspects and 4 different perspectives of the great life of Casper Holstein. I just want to draw your attention to this book that I just found. It's called A Life in the Harlem Renaissance and the Transatlantic Caribbean, and it's of Eric Waldron by James Davis. And the reason why I am showing this book is that of all the books that I have looked at that have been published in New York, this is the first one, number one, that doesn't say anything about Casper Holstein as being a gambler. That is not in there. There's more emphasis on the relationship of Charles S. Johnson, who was the editor of the Opportunity magazine, and Eric Waldron, who wrote Tropic Desert, a novel. Now, Casper Holstein, as somebody else has already outlined, supported by giving prizes to young authors who submitted to the Opportunity contests, and he published the entire novel of Eric Waldron. So I think Eric Waldron is the one that has a quote. He says in this book here, he meaning Casper Holstein, defended the need for self-determination of the Virgin Islanders. He was a shrewd, astute political analyst who demonstrated commitment for the cause. I think that there's this part of Casper Holstein, a whole lot of information and research still needs to be done using newspapers, different newspapers from different perspectives, and perhaps some other kinds of journals and papers that are in the Schomburg collection. So we would like to thank all those who made this meeting possible. We would like to thank the St. Croix Friends of Denmark, the Provost's Office at the University of the Virgin Islands, the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts, and to Susan Beech, who wore 2 hats as Secretary of the Society and as technical assistant and as super chat person, question gatherer of answers person. Thank you very much to Amy Sanchez, who was our IT coordinator and worked with us no matter how stupid the question was about how to do this. She was there and she was very patient with us. And Aletha Bowman, who had obtained the Zoom program and put together the agenda. And I understand that she helped in the waiting room today, letting people in. We also like to thank our member, Gail Boynton, who oversaw the website and putting the message on the website. And she is working on the application forms for membership. And you will see that soon on the website, which is Virgin Islands, vihistorians.net. We thank you, the audience. We wish we could see you. This is the worst part of this whole thing, I'm sorry, is not to get feedback from the audience. To be sitting here at Caribbean Museum Center is nice, but there's no kinetic energy. That's all missing. So hopefully next time we will be able to, I'm gonna pray. I'm really gonna pray that we can have a face-to-face meeting because I'd love to see everybody. Thank you very, very much. Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you to the presenters, Mr. Hewitt, Mr. Christensen, and Mr. Williams for being here. And we wish everybody.
Chris, you were excellent. Carl Christensen, you were excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's your cousin Marvin.